Francis, thank you so much for being part of our oral history program. For decades now, you've been a leader in the environmental movement. You have managed, led, and mentored countless individuals, and your accomplishments are extraordinary. And we want to talk about that today with you. And I am going to start just by quickly summarizing what I think of as just some of the highlights of what you have done, and then turn over to ask you some questions about what you have done both at NRDC and on environmental issues. I know you were born in Summit, New Jersey, and developed a fondness for the outdoors, and then graduated later from Yale College as part of the first class of women to graduate. You received a master's degree from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. You came almost immediately to the Natural Resources Defense Council as an intern, and then served in a variety of leadership positions before taking a break to have 3 children, which I believe includes twins. Then you returned in 1990 to head NRD's strategic planning. You became the executive director in 1998 and the president in 2006. Under your guidance, NRDC has focused its efforts on establishing a clean energy future that curbs climate change, revives the world's oceans, defends endangered wildlife and wild places, protects public health by preventing pollution, and fosters sustainable communities. During that time period, while you have been leader, NRDC membership has more than doubled, and it's now well over 1 million people who are members of your organization. At the same time, you have done more than NRDC. With your husband, Paul Elston, you co-founded the New York League of Conservation Voters. You've served on many boards, and more recently, President Obama appointed you as to the National Commission on the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and the offshore drilling report. You've also authored books including Clean Energy on Common Sense. You are well known as an advocate, as a leader, but also as a mentor who have inspired thousands of other individuals. But how exactly did you come to environmental issues? How did you become interested in that area in the beginning?
Well, when I was in college, Earth Day occurred, and I knew I was going to go on a path of, in the public service direction. That's what really interested me. Actually, originally I was interested in urban studies. But Earth Day happened, and also about that time I became very interested in and committed to this wonderful wilderness area in New York State, the Adirondacks, which is a 6 million acre park, public-private, quite a unique part of the country with a very rich conservation history too. So, you know, as I was sort of in college deciding where do I want to go, I became a property owner with the rest of my family in the Adirondacks, and they were in the midst of a very interesting analysis and plan for a comprehensive land use plan for the Adirondacks, really the first comprehensive land use plan in the country, very complex one that integrated how public land should be managed, how private land should be managed. So the whole issue of the environment sort of caught me, swept me up, and I became very, very interested in it. So I went to the Yale School of Forestry, and not really knowing what my career direction would be, but I just found the whole experience to be incredibly exciting. The environmental movement was just really growing at that point. It was just emerging. So as my career developed, I matured as the movement matured. We sort of went in many ways in lockstep. So this isn't something, you know, when I was 5 years old, 10 years old, that I was going, I am going to be an environmentalist. That is not the way it was at all. But it was really more when I was in college and I was thinking, well, I know I want to work on behalf of the public interest. What aspect of that do I want to work on? And then, you know, Earth Day came along, this experience in the Adirondacks came along, and the two together really combined to what has been an incredibly rich and very rewarding career experience, one I never would have guessed I would follow, you know, in 19 71, 73, I wouldn't have known.
When I consider the leading environmental leaders of the nation today, to my knowledge, you're the only one that started as an intern and then moved up, through successive jobs with, more and more responsibility and authority. Describe that to me. I mean, why did you stay with the organization, and how did that evolution work?
First of all, I was very fortunate to come here to NRDC as an intern, and we have had always a robust intern program. John Adams, our founder, has always had a very deep commitment to bringing young people along. So, I was on the early edge of that intern program, but now at NRDC we have more than 100 interns and legal fellows during the course of every summer. It is a lot of people that we bring through the organization, and we, of course, consider all those people to be part of our family and our ambassadors to the broader world out there. So I think it's a very important part of NRDC. And as I said, NRDC was growing as I was growing up. So opportunities came along, and I started out working on land use issues in New York State, actually, which emerged from my interest in the Adirondacks, John's interest in the Catskills, and then that land use interest moved me into coastal issues, which moved me into offshore oil issues, and these things just kind of carried on. And every stage has been a very interesting one, whether I was on the program side or when I became more involved on the management side, and of course that's developed over the last really 2 decades. But I've always felt that my role is to figure out how to really support the incredible staff of NRDC. I think we have the most talented staff in the field. I think the reason we have that is that we really give them tremendous room to do their own advocacy in their own style and support them in doing that. And to me, that's really the job here at NRDC, is making all the staff a success in what they're doing, enabling them to be successful so that we have as many environmental advocates as we possibly could have out on a whole array of areas, being as effective as they can be.
You've been able, over that period of time, to attract extraordinary talent. Some of them have gone on to do very great things for the environment. How did you do that? How did you actually...
Well, I think that we have a philosophy of a light touch. This is an organization that supports its staff. It doesn't direct the staff. We agree on what the institutional priorities, the top strategic priorities for NRDC are. And then we really want to give people a lot of room. I think the reason people come here and they stay here is that we're widely known as recruiting top talent in the field and supporting them in a way that enables them to really be the leaders that they are in each of their areas. And I think that that's very important. I think no single person can really make the difference. You've got to have a whole lot of people working together, and we have a culture, and we try to create an environment that really gives them that opportunity to have success.
When you think about the time that you have spent here, what stands out in your mind is either the organization or your accomplishments that are really game-changing sorts of events?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, and I don't know that this is game-changing, but I think consistent and determined advocacy really is at the core of NRDC. Particularly now where we're in a fairly adverse political environment where there's just incredibly widespread attacks against our bedrock environmental protections. I think that the most important contribution that NRDC has made is this continued strong advocacy for basic environmental safeguards of our air, of our water, of our health over the 40-year period. We've never veered from our mandate, even as the politics go up and down, and sometimes there's support for our issues and sometimes they're not. We're as determined each time, under whatever leadership there is in the White House, to move the environmental agenda forward. And I think that is what is very, very significant and a major contribution of NRDC. I mean, we've stuck with the Clean Air Act since it was adopted. We've stuck with the Clean Water Act since it was adopted. We will stick with climate change until we get the carbon emission reductions that are required to bring the climate imbalance. I mean, it is that long-term commitment to the core issues of environmental protection that really makes NRDC, I think, unique, and it's a unique contribution that we've had in those areas. We've also had, wonderful successes when we have a campaign. There was a wonderful moment in the mid-90s when we secured the protection for Laguna San Ignacio in Mexico, where we had 1 million people really reach out to both Mitsubishi and the Mexican government saying this is the last natural lagoon where gray whales have their babies. It has to be protected. And you don't have that many highs when suddenly the president of Mexico acts on your behalf, and there's just a euphoria that takes over. But we don't have that many of those kind of very, very big wins, because even if you win on a legislative fight, you still have the long job ahead, which I think a lot of people don't think about, but that's only the first step. It takes a long time to get there, but then there's the long-term implementation and enforcement of those laws, and really holding the government accountable to do its job and holding the polluters accountable to what the law requires. So it's that, we're dug in for the long term. That's sort of our DNA, I'd say.
Has NRDC gone through structural changes during that time period, strategic plan changes, things that are adapting either nationally or internationally to changes or new problems or new discoveries of problems?
Well, I think NRDC changes in a variety of ways. Number one, it's always important to keep the issues in the forefront of your mind and make sure you're working on the most important ones. So, as we've grown, as we've matured, we're taking, and I say that historically we originally started working on land issues. We live on the land, we care deeply about the land. But as decades went by, the oceans and the atmosphere are just as endangered as the resources on the land. So looking at the whole ecosystem of the planet, the atmosphere, the oceans, and the land-based resources was, I think, a critical growth period for us, really embracing that whole and making oceans and atmosphere as high a priority as the traditional areas in which we work. I think that was really an important change. And we do assess that all the time. We not only assess what are the important issues, but more importantly, we assess what's the best way to have a real impact on those issues, because we want to be effective. We want to see how to have an impact. So I would say, over the several decades, we're constantly reevaluating the tools. We never shed a tool. We always add tools. So, we started really as a litigating organization. We have a very rich legal history. Earlier today, I was at Columbia Law School, and I was saying, the students studying environmental law at Columbia are reading case after case of precedents that really NRDC established in the 70s and 80s. So law is absolutely a fundamental for NRDC. But as we've gotten bigger, we've worked much more in the broader policy arena. We understood the importance of a membership. We built this 1 million member and activist force, which is important to represent a constituency across the country, also to have standing in legal cases, which is very, very important. We see communications as a very important tool. This is an unbelievably rich and even confused media environment that we're operating in now. Getting the message out on what we're doing, backing up our policy initiatives with effective communications is really, really critical. And I think now we're in an area where having more robust political engagement, having political muscle, the environmental community as a whole, not solely NRDC, is an area where we're making more and more investment, because we have, I think, some of the best policy minds in the field. Our environmental lawyers, our environmental scientists, our technical experts, they really are so incredibly knowledgeable. They know and they can design where we need to go on environmental policy. But in order to get there, we've got to back that up with effective communications, political muscle, grassroots, grass tops, the whole array of tools available to us. So what I think is fun about this job is, every 5 years or so, it's like the environment changes, the external environment changes, and you got to rethink, well, what are the tools that are going to make us effective today, and how do we bring those to bear on the institution? So, our core mandate to safeguard the earth and to have the best environmental protection system in the world stays the same, but how we do it, the array of tools that we bring to execute that, changes over time.
So one of the things you talked about in order to have an impact was at the political level. I have before me the book, A Force for Nature, that John Adams and Patricia Adams wrote. And they describe, or John does, in June of 1993, being drawn to the President's Council on Sustainable Development. And John goes at some length about how NRDC was involved as other environmental groups. But he actually says here that for all concerned, the real leader of our effort was you, who was the program director. It was you who did all the research, immersed yourself in the complex issues from fisheries to sustainable cities, and your mastery of facts, in fact, made this what it was. But what is your memory now, looking back? Do you see that as something good, the sustainable?
Well, I mean, it was a very interesting moment because the fact that the president appointed the President's Council for Sustainable Development, I think, was an incredibly important moment. I mean, the issue of the environment and how we design the economy for the future to be compatible for the environment was suddenly a presidential issue. Part of it was President Clinton, part of it was Vice President Gore. It was a commission that had NGO leaders like John and cabinet secretaries and business leaders. And I think it was actually maybe the first time, or the first time in my memory, where we really sat at an equal table with corporate CEOs, with cabinet secretaries, and with the NGOs, where those various issues of the environment, the economy, and the social well-being of people in the country was, in effect, equal. And it was, we learned a lot. I think we came out with very important reports. I think more important than the reports was the recognition that these issues are connected and we have to plan for their connection. Historically, in the environmental arena, there's always the economy versus the environment, jobs versus the environment. I think that's a false choice. I think that years ago, we really determined that it was a false choice, but I think there are those who like to keep it alive. I think the PCSD, that's what we called it, the President's Council on Sustainable Development, actually was an arena to put that to bed and to see where we could find common ground, and also to understand what the mandates for the business CEOs, to understand what our mandates were, for us to understand what their mandates were. One thing that was very clear is we operate in very different time horizons. The issues that NRDC focuses on are long-term. If it takes us a decade or 2 decades to accomplish a goal, we're prepared to do that. Whereas the business CEOs are looking at their quarterly statements, the quarterly reports, the return to the shareholders. We're just operating in very, very different environments. I think the one thing that was very valuable from that experience was really figuring out how do we shape our proposals in a way that they are going to be of interest to those who perhaps are not naturally our allies or even our opponents. Understanding what would make them come to a decision that would be better for the environment rather than worse for the environment is something I think that we learned a lot from that experience. I don't think there was a lot that was implemented from the PCSD. I think that the conversation, the dialogue, the relationships was much more important. The other thing that was really interesting about it was, well, we were sitting at the table talking about what a sustainable future for America should be. This was about the same time that Newt Gingrich came in and became the Speaker of the House, and there was a whole raft of proposals to roll back environmental laws. We thought it was bad then. I think it's worse now. But it was a very tough environment to be operating in. And in some cases, we found that there would be somebody sitting at the table who would be supporting a proposal for rollbacks in Congress while sitting at this table and promoting sustainable development. And John Adams was incredibly effective at calling them on that, not allowing that contradiction to go forward, but really addressing it head on. And there weren't, that, as I say, was really the first arena that we were operating in that gave us that opportunity. We've had many more since then, but that was, I think it was a pivotal moment to have these issues on an even playing field and try to figure out how do you balance the long-term well-being of the country.
I very well remember the dirty water bill of the 104th Congress, and what an enormous setback that would have been for the environment had it ever passed. But I do want to turn to NRDC and other environmental organizations. You have a long history, as does NRDC, of reaching out to other organizations and partnering on issues both domestically and internationally. How did that come to happen, and why do you do it?
So we're part of an environmental community, an environmental movement, and I don't think, and every organization, I think, plays a distinct role, and it's the combination that has the force of the movement. So we've always had a philosophy at NRDC, and really this came from John Adams, our founder, but I think it permeates the organization that there's an advantage to working with others, that you need to work effectively with others. So we're literally in every issue that we work on, we're in a coalition. We're in a Clean Air Act Defense Campaign coalition right now. We're in a Clean Energy Works campaign when we were trying to get climate legislation passed. We're in coalitions on clean water, on reform of the Toxic Substances Control Act. We're in coalitions in New York State on opposing fracking without adequate environmental safeguards. I mean, there isn't an issue that we work on where we don't work with others. And I think that, we bring very strong policy expertise to the table. That's our bread and butter, but other organizations bring other things as well. And I enjoy working with other organizations. I enjoy my colleagues from other organizations, and I think that there's a lot of synergy that we can develop if we work together.
When you look over the horizon of the statutes that we have, both state and federal, that are protecting not just the environment but natural resources, do you still see holes in that process? Do you still see areas that are really not being adequately protected, either because of there aren't enough statutory authority, or they're not really being utilized very well?
Well, I think there are several examples of that. Clearly, we don't have a national system to control carbon emissions. We don't have a price on carbon. We didn't pass comprehensive carbon legislation. We have a national commitment to to reduce our emissions by 17%, and we have various mechanisms to do that in the various agencies, but we don't have an integrated system to do that. So I think that's a serious gap. It's a top priority for NRDC to work on that. I think it's going to take us at least 3 to 5 years to get there, but I think there's no more serious issue facing all the systems that the planet depends on, as well as the well-being of people on Earth. That is just critical that we continue our work on that, however long it takes. I think similarly in oceans. Oceans is clearly an issue of the commons. There are many, many nations involved. No single nation is going to pass legislation. So we have to get our policy set for the coastal waters that the United States has authority over. We're doing that at the state level, some great successes in California on marine protected areas. We need to do it on the federal level, how we manage our marine resources, how we manage our fisheries. But we have to be engaged in international conversations. I mean, this is a global commons. The last remaining natural ocean that we have is the Arctic. And the Arctic sea ice is melting, and that area is going to be opened up. It's going to be opened up to fishing, to marine transport, to oil and gas drilling very, very soon. And yet we don't have a system of international standards or regulations for how resources we don't even know what the resources in the Arctic are, how quickly they're changing, and we certainly don't have a management regime in place. So, we have our work cut out for us, but I think the thing about the environment is, we live on the planet. We have 7 billion people on the planet. There are projections that there'll be 11 billion or 14 billion people we use resources every day. We use water, we breathe in air, we're putting things into the air and water, we're using minerals, forest products, products out of the ocean. How we use the resources of the planet is a critical issue facing all of us. We're not creating more resources. There's a finite amount. So long-term policies that actually manage these resources most sustainably to benefit the largest number of people who live here on Earth is just a critical issue that I think we all face in our own way every single day.
I want to follow up on that with what you're talking about with those gaps that exist and ask you about a transition point for NRDC. When you started at NRDC, it was generally a domestic institution by both law and policy, and now you had an organization that I can't think of too many countries that you have not either affected or looked at. How did that come to pass, and is that based on those holes that you were talking about for the global commons and others that you're trying to address?
Well, I think, yes, we're working much more internationally than we have before. We're particularly focusing on China, where we have a very robust office in Beijing with 30 people. And we started working in India just last year or 2 years ago. The reason we're doing that is because of the global commons, because we're looking at where the largest emissions coming from. Well, the largest emissions are from the US, from China. The emissions from India are growing rapidly. And we have very great expertise in clean energy strategies, in efficiency, in renewables, in utility reforms, policies for the power companies. So we want to share that with other countries, and we want to invest in the places that are going to have the biggest impact on the planet. So that's why we are invested in China and India, and also because these issues are part of the global commons. There are many international conversations that are going on, under the auspices of the UN, whether it has to do with climate or fisheries. We're engaged in those as well, and we'll continue to be.
I asked you the question about where there were holes yet in our environmental area, and you've addressed that. And I want to do the other side. Are there things now during your tenure looking at environmental accomplishments that the country has done well, that we have actually now improved on from where we were when you first started?
Well, first of all, I think that the United States has a very strong track record in cleaning up air pollution and water pollution. The Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, I think, have done a very important job. And you can see that as soon as you get on a plane and go to other parts of the world where they don't have those protections. And because we have an office in Beijing, I've gone there many times, and I think that just tells you immediately why the safeguards that we have put in place are so important, and why our work to get those safeguards in other parts of the world is very, very important too. I do think that there's no success here. That, as I said, there's a lot of people on the planet. The number of people are growing. The impact that we have day to day on the planet's resources is considerable. Our job is to figure out how to minimize those, how to protect the resources for the well-being of all people well into the future. And that's a constant job. So I've been here for a long time at NRDC. I've been doing it. But the thing that makes me excited is there's a whole generation of people who will be doing it well after I am. I mean, this is built into the fabric of our society. People expect their environment to be protected, expect their air and water to be clean, expect to have their health protected. And that's what NRDC is here to do, and we're going to do it, as far into the future. There's no end in sight for the job at hand.
We are now in a difficult economic time in the country. As you and I sit here, the unemployment rate is 9.1%, and does that make you pessimistic about the future of environmental issues based on just those economic challenges that exist?
Well, the economy is tough. There's no question about it. That clearly has an impact on the public interest community, particularly because we all depend on the generosity of others. I think as far as putting the policies in place, it requires us to be much more aware of, knowledgeable about what the economic implications are of the policy initiatives that we propose. I don't think there's any environmental solution that is going to succeed if the economic considerations are not built into it. At the same time, I think that there are things like pollution control technology, clean energy technologies, which actually create opportunities for the economy. I mean, we have over 40 years built an industry around pollution control technology that we export to other parts of the world. I mean, that's a good news story. We should be telling that story very loudly to people who question, whether there's value in environmental protection. The other thing to remember is that there are costs, very serious costs associated with not having environmental protection. And those are the health costs and the health impacts that are built in to people's lives who are suffering from asthma, respiratory disease, cancer, a whole host of other things that are associated with poor environmental quality. So, one of the goals I think that we all have is, how do we really do full cost accounting of what environmental impacts are? We have an economic system that doesn't do that now. They value clean air at zero, and there's no cost to polluting it. Well, we have to change that, and we have changed it for the basic pollutants, but we have to change it for carbon dioxide. And the same, there's no free lunch here. I mean, there are impacts if you contaminate the environment that we're in, and we have to build the cost of that contamination into the economic plan going forward. There are lots of people who are thinking about it, talking about it, but we have not yet succeeded in that. And I think until we do, we'll always, have a little bit of this environment versus jobs conflict that people like to promote, even though I think that there's plenty of evidence that it doesn't have to be a conflict.
I have talked a bit about your role as a manager and leader and advocate and policy leader. I really haven't spoken very much about one whole other area, and that is what you are doing as a mentor and someone who is in fact speaking to schools. You mentioned that 100 young people come through the summer of NRDC program. So you are seeing constantly the finest young people that we have. You've also, as a hallmark of your time here, emphasized innovation, and you've emphasized technology developments. Does that give you hope for the future?
Well, I'm always hopeful. I don't think you could be an environmentalist without being an optimist, because the evidence and the indicators are not great. So you have to believe that you can actually affect change, that you can improve it, that over time you're making progress. So I personally am an optimist. I'm not Pollyanna because I know how hard it is, but I am an optimist because I think we have shown steady progress. And I think it's steady on a continuum rather than these huge wins, although we do get those occasionally. I think young people are the future. I think having people who look at these issues differently, who are of their time and generation, who are creative and innovative about how to solve these problems is very, very important. Because I don't think that what we might have thought in 1975 is necessarily current in 2011. I think what we're thinking in 2011, the conditions in 2020 will be very, very different. So bringing in young people, broadening the movement, really spreading the word about what the various means are to affect environmental progress is important. And I love working with young people. I mean, NRDC is a young place. We're always bringing in young people, not only the interns, but every year, we're hiring a new raft of people who come through. And, of course, they're the ones who are going to be doing what I did 30 years ago. They're going to, 30 years from now, when I've, long since finished this assignment, they'll be working hard at it, and that's exciting. I think that it's a thrill, not only here where it's very exciting in the United States, but particularly going to China, where the environmental movement is just beginning. They don't have necessarily the civil society developed in the same way, or certainly to the degree that we do, but there is a civil society burgeoning there. There are young people who care about these issues, who want to make a difference and be a voice, and it's just exciting to see.
Francis, this has been tremendous. Your passion, your knowledge, your leadership skills come out in every single sentence that you have given. I want to see if whether or not you have anything else that you want to add as we try to collect the history and the thoughts of the leaders of our profession.
The only thing I would add is that I think that we're at a time where the environmental movement needs to reach out to a much broader public. I think that, you know, for 30 years, many in the country have sort of thought, well, the environmental movement can protect the environment, and I'm going to go and do my thing, which is different, whatever it happens to be. I actually think that to achieve environmental progress, there has to be a commitment and underpinning across the fabric of American society that believes in the value of environmental protection to their well-being. I actually think there is that feeling. I mean, we've done a lot of polling. We've seen, you know, there's always wide majority of people, you know, in the 60 to 70% believe strongly in clean air and clean water. But we need to unleash those voices, because I think everyone has a stake in their own well-being and in their environmental future. And we, the environmental community, need to figure out ways to reach out to those broader audiences, not to necessarily make them a member or make them feel that they have to be an environmentalist, but encourage them to be a voice for environmental well-being. Because I think if we can achieve that, we will affect change much more successfully than perhaps we've been able to in recent years.
I want you to know this has been an extraordinary interview, and I thank you very much. As the president of the Environmental Law Institute, I want you to know that when there are fights on the Hill sometimes, or maybe things aren't going perfect, there's a whole group of people that you don't even know, that look up to you, that cheer for you, that applaud for you, that think you are an extraordinary leader and are taking a great organization on a path that will benefit the whole world. So I thank you for what you have done on behalf of not just the people that you know, but a lot of people that you don't.
John, that's very nice.
Appreciate that.
That's very nice. That's the NRDC as the whole. All I do is support my team.
So thank you very much.
Great, great. I enjoyed that.